Welcome to this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author Laurel Colless, Australian New Zealand award winning children's author, is a literary compat- comparatist by education, spent 25 years working in sustainable business and journalism across Asia, Europe, and US, and before coming back to writing. So we'll talk about that. She is the founder of the Carbon Busters Club, a kids' climate science program that combines storytelling with science education. And through storytelling, her aim is to educate, entertain children with page-turning thrillers, she calls that, while empowering them to take the lead on big world problems like climate change, extreme weather, and plastic pollution. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you, and nice to see you again. Also, I think since this is live, we can say Happy Earth Day to your listeners. 22nd of April today. Happy Earth Day. Yeah. And I don't know if you're going to let me share some news that I got today about my book, Knights Unite, children's. Children's, I call them eco terror, maybe eco adventure. I got awarded by the US Nature Generation. I have to read it. The Green Earth Book Awards recommended reading for 2025. So my book was chosen in the young adult category, actually. So I'm really happy about that. Yeah. And I'm really happy that you gave me the stage so I could share that. Thank you to the Nature Generation, which is headquartered in Maryland and runs through in partnership with the University of Salisbury there. So they've put my book on their list to go out to elementary schools in the US this year as recommended reading. So I'm excited about that because, yeah, I really want to hit my target and tell my stories to as many willing kids as possible.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is a wonderful news, and what a day it is, and your book. It's a lovely day, I can tell you.
Oh, so it will be part of.
Yeah. This is your book, and this has got that whole award, if I understand it, and it will be part of the elementary school. It means children will learn about this in school.
Yeah, it's recommended. So I'm happy about that. It's a great start. And congratulations to the winners. So there's a lot of really good books, and their philosophy is to select books that inspire children to return to nature and to exactly what my mission is, actually, to get kids, entertain them, work at the intersection between entertainment and education, get them excited with high stakes adventures, and sort of bring them back to nature and get them inspired to get closer to nature, to care more about the environment, and ultimately to want to fix things, because our relationship with the environment is somewhat broken. At least we grown-ups understand that. But still, it's all about entertainment and storytelling, from the get-go.
Absolutely. But storytelling with a purpose here, Laurel. And let's talk about that purpose. But before that, let's understand your journey a bit, Laurel. You were, doing something else and then came into writing. How did this transition happen? Tell us a bit from that. How did the author part, what is the story behind you as an author?
Okay, well, just very quickly, because we don't have too much time, but and I'd much rather talk about my characters in my book than myself, but I did start in literature. So I did my university degree in New Zealand quite some years ago, but I studied English literature and graduated as a literary comparatist. I wrote my thesis on medieval poetry and with a lot of mythology, and so this kind of storytelling I'm doing now harkens back to that. But like many New Zealanders, I left the country straight after I graduated, went abroad, ended up working in the corporate world, went to Japan, spent time in Italy, actually in Europe. Now I'm living in Finland. I did have quite a long stint in the US, working in climate technologies with Virginia Tech, and in business and governmental 3-sector partnerships. So I was doing all that for close to 25 years, really focused on the climate crisis. And I was just getting so frustrated with the pace of change and the way we were addressing it in the grown-up world that I started to think, by then I had 2 children of my own who at that time, 10 years ago now, were the target age group for my novels. So I started thinking about the upcoming generation who get excited about nature still. They still see the magic in nature. If you think of, for any of your viewers who have 9 to 12-year-olds in their life, they're still excited about the magical elements of nature. And when they hear about the climate crisis, they get, this sense of urgency. We have to do something in a way that maybe adults don't, because we're so much more weighed down by, these daily pressures of earning money and, generally taking care of things aside from big issues, big macro issues like the climate crisis. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I sort of pivoted away about 10 years ago, and I've still carried on as a consultant I haven't quit my day job fully, but I've been gradually churning out these books. I'm on my 4th book now. Yeah, I don't know if you want to, I don't know what kind of show this is, but there was a kind of a mystical experience also that happened about the time when I made the pivot, which I sometimes talk about. Can I share?
Yes, please.
A kind of woo-woo thing. It happened to me when I was living in Washington, D.C., and nothing like that has happened to me since. And I was in a situation where I was receiving a massage from someone who was a Reiki masseuse, who said to me, sometimes when she said, I'm definitely not psychic. Her name was Heather. She said, I'm definitely not a psychic, but I do sometimes get things when I'm massaging, particularly around your legs, the legs of my clients. I sometimes get sort of psychic messages, and I'm like, really? Okay. I'm a fairly grounded person, but I like magic and mysticism. So she said, if anything comes to me, shall I share it or shall I just leave it? And I'm like, of course, share it. If you get something, sure. So we're halfway through the massage, and she does apparently get something. And she says to me, have you been thinking about children or doing any writing for children? And I said, oh, well, it's nothing serious, just a little notebook, nothing important. And she said, no, she said, you have to do this. I'm getting a message that you have to go and do this. And I'm like, well, what do you know? Everyone's saying you have to go and do this writing. It's really important. And so by now I'm sitting up on the massage bed and getting my robe on. Let's talk about this. What is it? And she said, well, I'm getting all your guides and angels. She said, there's an angel on your head. And I'm like, I was very skeptical. I'm like, come on. But the thing was, afterwards, I said to myself, well, I've never shared that with anyone. So how could she possibly know? And I don't know, it was a very important thing for me, because I decided that, okay, I don't know what it was. Maybe I should believe it, maybe I shouldn't, but I'll take it as a call to action. And if I hadn't, so that's when I really started more in earnest, pulling together plots and getting going with the stories, and really thinking this would be a journey that I'm going to take. And what I want to share maybe with your listeners is that it's not so much that I have absolute faith that this was a mystical experience. What it is that if I hadn't had that sort of moment with this stranger, all the trials that I've had over the last 10 years, I mean, it hasn't been easy to get where I am now. I've made mistakes, and I've had some false starts, and, the books haven't always been selling as well as I'd like. Well, they're still not selling as well as I'd absolutely like. But because I had this kind of call to action in this very mystical and interesting way, an emotional way, I've turned back to that now and then as a kind of badge. And that's been what's made me keep going. So here I am 10 years later. My children are now 18 and 21, the little children I started writing for, and I'm still on the journey. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. It's every man's story that you have this kind of epiphany, and it puts you going in a complete 180-degree direction, and I'm staying the course. So yeah, there's no way back now except I'm going forward. So yeah,
Absolutely.
what you think of that?
God has his own way of getting the message across, and he got it
Yeah,
through
that's one way of looking
through.
at it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's why let's come to the story itself. Uh, Knights Unite. So tell us a bit about this book. What have you tackled into this book? How should one understand about this book? I see the cover; it's wonderful,
Yeah,
but I
you
just
see
want
the
you to
monster.
help us understand. Yes.
Okay, so really briefly, I had to decide, how am I going to tackle this? So climate change is the villain, right? How do you make climate change the villain, and still make it interesting for this kind of age group? So, and also, well, I decided that I would have to sort of hit the kids through the imagination, because yes, I wanted to address a real world problem, the climate crisis, extreme weather attacks. These are really scary things that we're reading about or seeing or experiencing firsthand, every day somewhere in the world. You know what I'm talking about, AJ. It's the floods in your neighborhood, big floods in Pakistan last year, in Valencia in Spain, here in Europe, wildfires in California, in Greece, the Amazon forest. There's something going on. Hurricanes in Florida on the Panhandle. There's always something going on, and it's scary for kids. But at the same time, that's the problem I wanted to tackle with my stories. So in the end, I had to go with monsters. So don't laugh. I mean, these are. I had to draw. I wanted to become a sort of myth maker. So I'm drawing on indigenous Greek mythology, on biblical. So the monster in this book is a kind of biblical leviathan, sea monster, in the way it appears, but the way it acts is maybe more like a Greek. If any of your listeners have read the Odyssey, the story of Odysseus getting home, his
Yes.
20-year voyage home to Ithaca. So in one of the monsters he and his crew come across is called the Charybdis, and that Charybdis sucks seawater into its being, and then it spews it out and tries to drown the sailors as you go by. So, so if you look at extreme weather and you think of overconsumption, these monsters of mine, I've added an environmental twist to, in that they are birthed out of human garbage, human waste. So in a way, I'm weaponizing waste with my monsters. And this one in particular is a blind sea monster, a sea beast that is birthed from way down in the dark, 4 miles down at the bottom of the sea, where we now know, scientists now know, microplastics have been collecting. So it's birthed out of plastic. It's a demonization of plastic pollution. So it's made by us. And my kids, have to be courageous. They have to, well, they don't have to, they have a choice. But in my case, they take courage, and they face down this monster in very interesting and I think quite entertaining ways. So that's kind of what I'm doing, and this is the third book now. But the other two books have had different kinds of. One of them had a storm lord, which showed up as a weather monster with all these weather warriors around it, hails, and you can imagine rain bombs and this kind of weather related demonifications, if you like. And actually, when we were chatting last time, I mentioned to you that I was living in Greece by the time I really started developing the monsters, or what I call anthrogs. So they've got their own pantheon and their own special name. They're called anthrogs, which is an amalgamation of two words. The Greek word anthropos, which is the word for humankind or mankind. I put that together with the word hog, which is sort of symbolic in the English language of overconsumption and greediness, taking more than you need. And
Right.
so you've got these monsters which literally birth out of garbage dumps or out of landfill, and they show up as wildfire, storms, massive flooding, extreme weather events, but always in a sort of original and curious sort of way. And my kids, the characters, are they're at this secret school for the world's top ecodemics or top eco kids, and they're learning also how to deal with this problem. But I don't want to give my readers a free pass and to make them think this is some problem with monsters that's happening over in another world. This is our real world, and these are our real world problems. I just wanted to sort of attack the issue more from imagination and in a way that's kind of safe for children, because it's really scary. I don't want to overwhelm the reader with fear, but I want them to sort of still read about this stuff in the safety of their bedrooms, in their pajamas, under their quilts, with these kind of safe monsters. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed,
Yeah,
Laurel.
that's
And
sort of
I'm
the way
I'm
I've been
thinking,
thinking.
absolutely. And I'm thinking, real world problem, explaining through fantasy fiction to children. How it's a very tough task. How do you calibrate both these things at the same time?
Yeah, because there is a kind of a disconnect if you think that I'm using fantasy fiction to talk about the real world. But as I said, since I'm targeting 9 to 12-year-olds, I wanted to keep it more on this kind of exciting imagination level. But I also, actually, while I was getting back to writing, I did the masterclass of one of your compatriots, Salman Rushdie, and that was one. I mean, he's a master, of course, at putting this fantastical overlay into his stories when needed. And one of the things Salman Rushdie says in his masterclass is, if your carpet needs to fly, then let it fly. So these anthrogs are kind of like my flying carpet. It doesn't mean that the story is any less real, uh, but to explain certain elements, I've decided to have this kind of fantastical overlay. And one of the other things that I love about Salman Rushdie's way of thinking is that he tells us that there are many ways to tell the truth when you're writing. And sometimes, the truth about who we are as people, the truth about how we treat each other as human beings, and the truth about how we treat our world, our environment. And sometimes a fantasy approach can be maybe a more effective way to tell the truth than this kind of realistic fiction. Anyway, that's what I'm going for with this series. And, I think for this age group, at least I've had some good feedback. So,
Absolutely. So I talked about fantasy fiction as well as the real, but let me understand it. What was the most challenging part of writing this book? Uh, is it that thing or something beyond that?
well, I mean, of course, it's very hard also just to get up every day and you have to write. You have to have a system. You have to learn to trust your process and trust yourself and believe in yourself. And that's something that, I mean, I've had terrible imposter syndrome, especially since, I'm starting late with the writing, even though, I did have this grounding back in my education. Uh, I think it was learning to trust the process, because what I've done is now I've just followed podcasts and webinars and done masterclasses, and I've just written and written and written. And if I can churn out 500 words a day, 500 words that I'm satisfied with, I usually write more, but eventually a book emerges. If you just get up every morning and you do that, and obviously you keep working and thinking along, when you're walking the dog, you're working through a scene. It's not only just this time at your desk, but a book emerges, you know, because you just keep showing up. And that's something, if there are any writers in the audience, I'm sure they know what I'm talking about. You just have to, and then you some days you're writing stuff and you're like, I could never show this to anyone, but that's fine because you don't have to. You just keep going. And quite often after you've written a few hundred words, something really beautiful suddenly comes out, or something exciting, or a new plot twist just sort of comes out because you start to flow. So in terms of difficulties, yeah, maybe that, yeah, I think it's getting over the imposter syndrome. And obviously one never really does get over that, but you just keep going and believing that somewhere there are some kids that want to read this stuff and they're going to be entertained and hopefully inspired.
Absolutely. Inspired, and they have to solve this problem. We have not been
I
able to solve
know,
this problem.
I know we've left this upcoming generation. They have so much more is going to be expected of them than our generations, for example. Yeah, so they have to be up to the task. But another thing, I don't know whether you want to talk about literacy. It's another thing that we also, a challenge that I took when I started this series was, I have my brother in New Zealand and his wife are both quite high up in education, and they're working with all age groups. And literacy is a very big problem, as you know. In the US now, I was looking up some figures last week. The 2024 figures for literacy were quite sobering. They were, I think it was a 30-year, yeah, actually I wrote down here, 40% of fourth graders in the US are now scoring below basic reading proficiency. That's fourth graders. That's sort of in my target. And that's hasn't been that low for 30 years. Obviously, it's not just an American problem. UK also is looking at falling rates, and elsewhere in Europe. But the saddest part of some of the statistics on literacy that I've been looking up is that large numbers of children no longer read for enjoyment. So I'm not just talking about being tested on your reading, but I'm talking about, I don't know about you, AJ. I think you're doing a podcast on books. So I presume you love books and you like to read yourself. But I think that for a child, apart from, I mean, of course, when a child picks up a book and I think something magical happens when they read a scene. If they're getting a story and they read a scene compared with watching it on a screen, something happens to their brain. They have to actually work really hard to imagine the characters. They have to work with the author to see the colors of the scene and to hear and smell and bring it all alive in their own brain. They have to do all that work themselves. So obviously reading, we know, is very good for a child's brain, for their developing their emotional and creative abilities, maybe developing empathy when you read about a character and you have a chance to feel not so alone, get into someone else's head and follow the story and see what their perspectives are when they're faced with challenges. All these things are, in my mind, are boosting literacy rates, which was sort of a goal. So I'm writing, I didn't mention it earlier, but I'm writing what some maybe what publishers would call a group ensemble. So you've got at least 5 or 6 kids. It's a school series, so you have access to lots of diverse children, diverse ways of thinking. Everyone comes from everywhere, and they are solving problems together, which is what we need, obviously, to it's going to take a village, as we know, to solve these big macro intractable problems that we have, like the climate crisis. It takes a team, so it takes teamwork, which obviously is important for this age group as well. So I've been looking at elements. I want to make sure that any reader who picks up my book can see someone a little bit like themselves in the story. And I also want them to be able to see kids that are very unlike them. so they can get new perspectives and open their minds and get fresh outlooks. So, these are the kind of things I was also thinking at the outset when I started the series. My main protagonist, Peter Blue, he's a boy, and I've understood from my brother that boys are sort of falling the fastest when it comes to giving up reading, which is so sad. Although I think kids in India are still reading maybe more than many other countries. So I'm very happy about that. Yeah, so there was literacy, and there was one more big world problem that I wanted to take on, which is very relevant to today's kids. In the plotting of the stories, I don't know if we've got time, but the other problem that children are experiencing more and more is what we call eco-anxiety. Have
Right.
you heard people talking about that? So children experiencing this kind of sadness and heaviness, and it's also a disempowerment. So one of my characters in the novel, in this new novel, is suffering from what they're calling the eco sadness, and it's really weighing heavily on her, and she's not able to take part in some of the activities. So loosely, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not trying to tell people how to treat. It can be very serious. It can also be just passing sort of disappointment. So for a 10-year-old, for example, who goes to school and hears from their teacher about the climate crisis, or hears, gets some pictures of Amazon tree felling, or just, gets a feeling about problems, and then they go home and they find that their parents are not at all engaged, or they're adults in their larger community or in their church or wherever they meet other adults, they see that they're disengaged, and maybe they feel worried. They feel powerless themselves to do anything. So the kids in my book are really empowered. They have to be courageous. It's not easy, and they have to figure out, they need big ideas, and then they need to take action. But I think that we're also seeing that in the world now, and I've been looking at something that I find really exciting and positive, and that is kids who are doing these class action lawsuits around the world. I don't know if you have any in India, but in Europe, in the US, in 2015, one of the largest, which is just now wrapped up, it was called Juliana versus the US, and it was a 15-year-old who took on the US federal government, basically talking about the environment and about climate change, and basically saying that the kids are not getting a fair deal in terms of the future. There are most of these cases, the children don't actually win, but they're standing up there and they're being given a voice. Some kids as young as 9 years old, and I find that so empowering. And in fact, I wrote, obviously in my books we're not doing that, but in this mythical world, my character, who's one of the sort of minor characters who has the ecosystem, who has the ecosystem sickness, she steps up in the very late stages of the adventure, and she confronts the monster in a really fun and unusual way, surprising way, I think. I won't go into it. Her name's Tippy. Actually, she's Indian origin. She's Tippy Patel. And she, afterwards, when we're sort of doing the wrap up and the day is saved, and we're doing this debrief with the way the kids do at the end of the book, Tippy says, helping helped. And what she's saying is, I think I feel better because, I helped in a way that was really helpful in in this case. And, now she's feeling more empowered, and she's ready she said, I think I'm cured. So, I'm oversimplifying, but yeah, I'm trying to look at big world problems like climate change. I'm trying to get kids back to reading and address literacy rates, and then also think about how kids can feel empowered by reading these books and then getting out into their own neighborhoods, and have this maybe as a call to action, reading one of my books and being inspired by my characters. Wow, it feels like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's quite a big challenge.
No, you are guiding the kids. It's their planet, their life, their world. And because we are giving them a problem which was ours, we are giving it as their problem. So they will have to take everything, they will have to take charge, and they will have to tackle it the way they want to. We can't
Right,
interfere in that.
which is not very fair, of course. What you just said reminded me that if you look into, say, Greek mythology or most of the mythologies, these big monsters that show up, and in this case, my anthrogs are sort of, they're like the embodiment of the problem that we, the grown-ups, have created. We, the previous generations, have created. So quite often in mythology, when the monster shows up, it's often as a punishment. Like in Greek mythology, when a city has been behaving wrongly, or there's some kind of need for a punishment for a group of human beings, a big monster shows up, and someone has to step forward to fight it. And the story of Hercules comes into my mind, where Hercules has to go up and fight a monster which has taken one Greek princess and chained her to the rocks. And he has to go and fight this monster. And the monster, of course, was not of his making, but he has to show up and be courageous. And I think my kids also, they're facing down these monsters that were sort of not entirely of their own making, but they do it. They find the courage and they do it because it matters. Maybe that sums
Absolutely,
it up.
absolutely. It matters, and what you do indeed matters a lot, Laurel. And I'm sure not just this book, several book of yours indeed will matter in the long run,
Thank
and it
you.
will indeed matter big. I'm sure.
Thank you.
And that is what brings me a lot of people would want to know more about all these books of yours, about you, about further plans, and also a lot of kids also. What's the best way for them to connect with you, get hold of your books?
Well, I would love people to come onto my website, which is laurelcollis.com, or www.laurelcollis.com. The books are available anywhere where you get your online books. What I'd really love is the books are available through a global distribution wholesale called Ingram Spark. That's where librarians go to buy books, and bookshops. So what I'd really like, since I'm trying to draw attention and raise awareness about overconsumption, is if you do buy the book, please do then share it. If you can find the book, Amazon, for example, and their marketplaces quite often have secondhand books. But if you can also persuade your librarian at your school or in your municipality or even your local bookstore, but particularly because I love circular economy and I would love the books to be reused and reread by as many people as possible. I'd love kids to mention Ingram Spark, which is how their librarians can order at a wholesale rate the book to bring into libraries. But yeah, I think that answers your question. So anywhere where you get your online books, you can put in Knights Unite, and there's also 2 books that come before it, which you don't have to read in order, but they're also adventures with the same bunch, and a lot of similar problems, but in sort of different adventure scenarios.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.